Hello and welcome to this episode of Health and You. I am Sumi Sukanya Datta, and today's topic for discussion is the rising burden of strokes in India and the latest evidence linking it to air pollution. The latest report by the Lancet, which came out last week, showed that the country recorded over 12.5 lakh new stroke cases in 2021 compared to 6.5 lakh cases in 1990. To discuss this, we have eminent neurologists Dr. M.V. Padma Srivastav and Dr. Sudhir Kumar. Dr. Padma is head of neurology with Paras Hospital in Gurugram and has previously been associated with the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi. Dr. Sudhir is associated with Apollo Hospitals in Hyderabad. Thank you so much, Dr. Padma and Dr. Sudhir, for joining us in the discussion today. We will start by asking Dr. Padma first help us understand which are the main types of strokes and what how air pollution is now being linked to it.
Okay, so what you asked is basically, akin to reading out of a whole textbook, because you start off with stroke or a brain attack, and understanding what that means is essentially lack of blood supply going into the brain in whatever form you have. Either the main artery is blocked, so there is no flow, or the artery is ruptured and you have bleeding in the brain. So the most common in even in Indian subcontinent would be the ischemic, or where there is a clot, there's a lack of blood flow to the brain, and the even we have a lot of subtypes of the ischemic variety as well. Depending upon how the clot is formed, it may be going up from the heart, which is called as cardiobolic, which may happen in large blood vessels. Now, let me tell you something which is very interesting here. You put your own little fingers up to your throat here, even your own little finger. Now that is the size of the main, what we call as a common carotid artery. So that's the thickness of your own artery, which is the main artery, which is there anteriorly. Half of the size is behind, it's a vertebral. So it's a big mesh of blood supply that goes, uh, and each every nanosecond counts, because you need a constant blood flow. If there is a lack of something happening there, that part of the brain which is supplied by that artery will die. So that
Okay.
said, for the time is brain, and that's the importance of why we need to prevent strokes, and if it happens, why we need to manage it ASAP with lightning speed, because every second counts. If there is no blood supply going to one part of the brain, that part of the brain will die. Unless you have something heroic happening later, getting back the lost function will be a Herculean task. Said that, you gave very interesting statistics about the rising incidence of strokes in India. And in the developing world, it is true that the non-communicable diseases, NCDs, and I think Print also brought out some very beautiful articles way back when this was published in 2017 in Lancet, where there's been a sort of a paradigm shift, almost I would say a tectonic shift in how the health facility or health burden in Indian society has been. Earlier we only talked about infections, lack of potable water, maternal child health. Now we do talk of NCDs. And NCDs, you have cancer, you have heart, you have brain, and you have the kidney. You now have the pulmonary, and even the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So those are the real big 5 and 6 NCDs, which are now taking a lion's share of the health burden in the society, and that's why your statistics are so staggering. Now coming to the air pollution. Now the
Right.
air pollution has always been there, in the annual, in the horizon. Look, there is something which links the air pollution and what's happening, especially in the countries which are now developing, which we now you have a twin revolution. You have IT or BT, but the industrial revolution was always there, where you have increased mechanization. And when you talk of mechanization, you are felling trees, you are looking into an ambient atmosphere, which is actually not optimal for the so-called holistic health, but which is pertinent for a development of the race and economics and what have you. Said that, the pollutants are several. You have gases, you have soot, you have particles. But the main thing, when you're looking at a particulate matter, you have something which is 2.5, and you have less than 2.5. Okay, 2.5 and above is what we traditionally thought involving the lungs, the respiratory system. So when you go to a polluted atmosphere, you cough and you have dyspnea, your breathlessness, the lung problems increase. But when you're looking at the particulate matter, which is less than 2.5, which are actually traversing the lungs and going into the bloodstream, that is where you have the cardiovascular and the brain vasculature getting affected. In that, we have had now a lot of literature and lot of evidence which is proving how this can affect the blood circulation. We talked about that. The blood circulation is what is important for strokes. So when you look at a blood circulation, look at a blood vessel, there are walls and there is a flow of blood. It can affect both the walls as well as the flow of blood. The flow of blood becomes thicker, clotted, and the walls become inflamed. So, in that process, when you have to talk about it scientifically, there's a lot of scientific jargon which we can talk about in terms of inflammation, in terms of excitotoxicity, in terms of what is called as axillary atherosclerosis. But to cut the long story short, we have evidence, and if time permits, later on after Dr. Saab also speaks, I'll talk to you about what the research that we've done in AIMS and also our published articles. Because this whole lot of interest is because of the Valerie Fain's article which got published from Australia, where there was more evidence gathered. But if you look at the last 1 decade, there's been a scourge of literature which is
Mm-hmm.
added on, and there is a cumulative evidence which is linking to increased number of the cardiovascular and cerebrovascular disorders, which obviously what we're talking about are strokes, both ischemic and bleeds, because of an increase the exposure to air pollution, immediate as triggers, and also long-term exposure.
Dr. Sudhir, if you have gone through the Lancet report, what do you think are the highlights and what lessons do you think might be there for India?
Yeah, I think the Lancet article that throws a lot of interesting, even though they are not very good things to note. So number one is that the prevalence, incidence, and the deaths due to stroke they have been rising in most of the low-income countries and middle-income countries, and that includes our country, India, also. And if you look at the risk factors, so that's another. If you look at the risk factor of stroke, one thing which is common across all the countries is hypertension. That is, high blood pressure is the number one. There we are similar to other countries. But if you look at the number two, number three, and number four risk factors, so in that number two, our country, it is smoking. And the smoking is something which is declining in some countries, but in our country it is going up, including women also have taken to smoking. The third, Dr. Padma also discussed in detail some time back, is air pollution. So air pollution definitely is one of the big risk factors. In most of our metros, it is badly polluted, and even the second tier cities also we have a good amount of pollution. And one more thing is, we talk about pollution outside, but even indoor pollution. So when we use our cooking fuel, including our gas, so there is some degree of household pollution also, which is at number four in Southeast Asia, and including India. And then most of the European countries and high income countries, the fruit intake and vegetable intake has gone up. In our country, it still continues to be low. So that is another problem in terms of risk factors that we note. And and one more aspect is the salt consumption. So in our country, still the salt consumption is on the higher side, and that is additional risk factor. So looking at these, these are the risk factors which are more common for our country. And then if you look at, sometime back you asked about ischemic stroke and the hemorrhagic stroke. So there also we have slight, difference. In our country, we tend to see more of hemorrhagic stroke, where the blood vessel ruptures and the blood leaks out, as compared to ischemic strokes. Of course, ischemic strokes are still two-thirds of the strokes are ischemic, which happens due to lack of blood flow, and about one-third due to hemorrhage. But this is definitely about, say, 5 or 10% is more than high-income countries. And and then other aspect is the younger population. So earlier, when we say 2 decades back, we used to see that stroke is a disease of older people, but now we do see a lot of young people also getting affected with stroke, say below 55 years, even below 50 years. So stroke occurring in the younger population, that's another highlight. So none of these things are good news. So we have to rapidly, take action to
Right.
change all
And
this
and there
rapidly.
may be message there for individuals also, because there are many factors which are under our control, and we can, by making modifications in the lifestyle, we can probably bring down, if not totally eliminate, these risk factors, right? Yeah. Dr.
Definitely.
Padma, you wanted to speak about the research that probably you have done, and also research by others when you were with AIMS. Can you please talk a little about, elaborate a little
Yeah,
about
so
that?
since the at this point of time, the focus is on air pollution as an one which has emerged as a definitive risk factor for these vascular diseases.
Right.
So this, as I said before, a decade earlier, this was there as a suspicion. Look, we need to understand this, and it is not
Mm-hmm.
just respiratory diseases. And then so a lot of effort has gone into it. So, under the Department of Science and Technology and also under the Indian Council of Medical Research and several other scientific organizations, we also had conducted some studies which we looked into two things. One, like, what is the overall exposure, say, in a time factor? Now, the person who's living in, say, in Delhi, or he is in NCR, or is
Right.
he living in a village which is, say, 100 kilometers away? And actually coming with strokes to us. So in that part of it, now what has been we had a study where the person would go to the residence and actually look at, you can measure this particulate matter by a handheld device.
Okay.
You can measure them. So then this person would go, like in an acute stroke, say the person has come to us, in the next 48 hours the researcher would go to where the person was staying, and in the ambience in the house and outside the house record that the ambient air pollution status as such. So then we correlated whether the occurrence of an event was like a trigger. Means there is an ongoing problem, and then you see that there is and you have this, the air pollution board has a dynamic data over a period of time across, like say for example there's an average of the last 1 month, say.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the average the same as what is been there on that particular day, or the exposure to that day, or the last 1 week, or last 4 days? You
Right.
calculate that and see if there's been an upsurge or a sudden surge in the air pollution. And if that person now, and then see that if that is a trigger where you match all other factors, including your your diabetic status or a blood pressure status or whatever, you match those other parameters and see if this stands out as the one of the triggers at least which has precipitated an event. And the second thing, the people also have seen an epidemiological thing. That is what Valerie Fain's, the article was, that over a period of time, you look at this ambient particulate matter concentrations and the type of them, along with other vascular risk factors, and if this as a standalone will stand up to be a big vertical on its own as a risk factor. So even in our studies, we found that this is a trigger, and the trigger
Okay.
was much more common in people who already had comorbids, like in an elderly or a diabetic who are, who continue to smoke like a chimney. Okay. So who will not
Mm-hmm.
listen. So, your own, as you rightly brought out, your own lifestyle problems. So it was much more common in people who have comorbid conditions in which sudden exposure or short-term exposure to air pollution can definitely act as a trigger to to precipitate an event from happening. Both, I think this was also seen for heart attacks, but now we've actually seen for strokes. And a chronic long term exposure is not only for chest diseases, it is also seen as an independent risk factor for occurrence of strokes. So
Yeah.
even in our studies, which is as close home as possible, this is done in Delhi, we've seen
Mm-hmm.
that this is a proven factor.
Yeah, very important point there. Dr. Sudhir, please also help us understand how is generally, there are different types of strokes as ma'am line discussed already. But what is the way of managing? If I know it's a very vast question, so you have to briefly put it for our viewers. But how are these cases generally managed, and also whether there have been any changes in the way these cases are now managed vis-a-vis earlier? Do we have more sort of sophisticated therapeutics methods to manage stroke cases now?
Yes, definitely. So, we have come a long way, almost 30 years since the thrombolysis was started. And so that is called as clot buster drug. So, and
Right.
now to start off with, we only had few centers, but now almost every center, there are hundreds of centers across the country where this thrombolytic therapy can be given. Of course, the treatment is time bound, even though we say 4.5 hours from the time of symptom onset. but earlier the better, because with every minute delay, more and more brain neurons get damaged. And then even
Right.
after 4.5 hours, also we have now interventional procedures where actually we can go in with and then remove the clot. So retrieval, what is called thrombectomy. And again, these are available in many centers across the country. So people should be aware that whenever they suspect stroke, so when there is weakness of one side of face, weakness of arm, weakness of leg, or if they're not able to speak or understand, so this could mean stroke, and they should immediately rush to the nearest center where there is a CT scan facility. So we don't need to go for high-end MRI. CT scanner is sufficient for us to rule out brain hemorrhage and then go for these treatments. So definitely
Okay.
we have come a long way, and then it is freely available, and the costs also are not very high. And now we have two drugs. Earlier we only had one drug. Now we have two drugs approved by DCGI, which can be given altiplase and inactiplase. So both are effective and safe.
Yeah, Dr. Padma, would you also like to add something to it?
Absolutely. As Dr. Sudhir said, we have come probably miles now from what has been. It's a totally nihilistic attitude towards a stroke. Ho gaya to kya karna hai? Just do physiotherapy. Okay, tell them to take aspirin types. So now, but time still rules. But now we also have this Amazonian advances in neuroimaging, whether it is CT based or MR based. So, earlier it used to be 4.5 hours or 6 hours, 24 hours. Now we have those imaging gadgets that even beyond the so-called time window frames, there are a certain section of people that we can still help. So using this technology, we are still being able to identify the cerebral tissue which is jeopardized, means which is dying, but is not dead. So as long
Right.
as you can pick up a dying brain, then you can help prevent a death from happening. So that is now possible because of these humongous advances in imaging, and that technology is also percolated down to a large we've also developed the telestroke facility. So now, even if we all said and done, we still probably just have around 3,500 neurologists for a 1.4 billion population and growing by every year. So that's never going to suffice. So now we definitely have ways to get more physicians into the ambit. And just like you have heart attacks being managed by physicians, the first responders in an emergency, you can do that by even for strokes. That is a telestroke. So there are guidelines now published by the ICMR for telestroke and for all this telemedicine activities. I think that's been a big thing. And
Yeah.
also, reaching out to the public. You actually take the hospital to the public, into where the community is, so that the reach also becomes easier by in terms of the mobile, what we call as a stroke units, that is now operational in Assam, and it's probably going to come more in the rest of the country, though it is more probably not so cost effective in terms of big metros, but then it is also being a venture. So I think the advances are more in terms of the understanding stroke, and so you're developing new strategies. But I think the advances are also being there now to be able to reach more people in a developing world. That's been, and the theme for this time's World Stroke Day, which is going to come up on 29th of October, is like, the greater than. That means, the greater than the challenge of stroke. So if we are together, we can be greater than, and overcome the challenges of stroke.
Yeah. So we touched upon the lifestyle factors that we can probably alter in order to bring down our risk for strokes. But if I ask you, ma'am, and also Dr. Sudhir, if you could also list some policy measures that you think could be there in India, which reduce, if not completely eliminate, the burden of strokes and related disabilities, what would they be? We'll start with you, Dr. Sudhir, on this.
Yeah, basically, one is at the individual level. So there we can definitely look at our lifestyle, diet, and sleep. So in the lifestyle factors, low physical activity is still one of the risk factors in across the world, including in India, because
Right.
we have many desk jobs now. So we have to increase the physical activity, and there are guidelines: 300 minutes of moderate activity in a week, and that is something we can do. And then the second thing is about the diet. Our diet is still very loaded with carbohydrates, less proteins, less intake of fruits and vegetables, and less intake of omega 6 fatty acids. So we have to modify the diet and go for more healthy diet. And third aspect is the sleep. we don't discuss much, but lack of sleep, sleeping for less than 5 hours is also one of the risk factors for stroke and heart attack. So ensuring that people sleep optimally for 7 to 9 hours. So these are the individual levels, and at the public level, definitely, controlling pollution is one of the major factors now. And I think both governments as well as at the people level, there should be guidelines how to tackle pollution at the same time, not jeopardizing our country's growth. So we need to find a balance. And then other things are also, sugar sweetened beverages. So that is something which is one of the biggest risk factors for stroke and heart attack, including in India also. And so we need, they already they are high GST, but we have to change the habits, the way people deal with them. So promote more healthier food choices and less of uh, this packed foods, ultra processed packaged foods, and sugar sweetened beverages. That's another thing we can look at.
Yeah. Dr. Padma, over to you.
So there is a hypertension initiative from Government of India, and which was done by ICMR. In fact, it won an award in the World Health Organization. You're aware of that. So the hypertension initiative, which has been done by the ICMR, and it's been hugely successful in terms of not just collecting a data at a peripheral level, but also, in fact, when you're doing that, you're also getting an awareness. You have an education campaign. You're actually measuring the blood pressure, and also institution of the essential medicines. So under the list of national essential medicines and the national list of emergency medicines, in the essential medicines, you also have the antihypertensives and anti-diabetic and the blood thinners. So, and also the development of, the provision of such things in the wellness clinic, and probably a further spread of this network of, to me, yes, tertiary care is an absolutely essential thing when things happen, but prevention is the foundation. And at a preventive level, what we've seen in the developed world, in much smaller countries, of course, it's a much bigger challenge for us because we are really big in whatever terms we have to count for that. So preventive modules. The preventive modules can be, as Dr. Sudhir said, about the educational awareness at a school level, whatever that may be. But even in the food part of it, like for example, you take Austria. So, I mean, I only know of this, but I'm sure there are several other countries that way, where there is at a national level, there's a regulation of how much salt gets into the food items. Now, but of course, there's a cultural challenge there, because there probably home cooking is less, more of what is bought. So, you have the
Right.
canned feed or whatever it is, whatever's there, that's all regulated. Now, it will not work for a country like us. We have a, huge, we are definitely heterogeneous in ways more than one. So, but then adopting such situations in certain geographic areas may still help. And then you also the development of apps. Now, this is an app world, really. So if you have a shopping apps which are extremely popular on your smartphones, you can actually have an app, and these apps have been developed internationally, which are for a cost, but with no cost apps have been developed in India, you know and then downloading, like there is a smart app which was developed in Himachal Pradesh. So downloading that app, it actually gives you risk score. You have your age, your gender, your current blood pressure, your blood sugar, and your lifestyle, you're continuing to smoke, whatever, and it'll give you a risk in the next 1 year versus 5 years. Am I going to develop a stroke or heart attack? Giving that number in your face, it actually, at least for an educated population, there will be sort of a wake up call.
Yeah.
And then you decrease it, and it'll also give you the immediate dividends. So my risk score from 10 has come down to 5, is a big high. So I think because we have a lot of educated and young people. Look at you, you are such a beautiful young girl there. So that's a population probably we need to really target and start young, and I think we can build it up. And yes, there are a lot of population based initiatives that the government has taken up, which is a welcome step, and I think it will go forward. And this is just in addition to what Dr. Sudhir has already said.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was really insightful. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking time out for this discussion.